Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers, joined by fellow lifetime Longhorn, the young phenom CJ Vogel. We're here again for a way too early breakdown of the Longhorns season. And this year, this week we're breaking down the Vanderbilt Commodores, breaking down their opponent, the Vanderbilt Commodores. And let's just start out, CJ, talking about really the football history of the Commodores in the SEC, and it hasn't been a good one. No winning seasons in the last 10 years, just 3 of those since 1982, a mere 9 all-time bowl appearances, no 10-win seasons, just 4 9-win seasons. 2 of those came under James Franklin, and last season 2-10, 10-game losing streak, and they lost every SEC game by at least double digits. So it's been some dark days there for Vanderbilt, but they're making some changes. Clark Lee, the head coach there, he is now going to call the defense. He is going to be the defensive play caller and the coordinator now. And they brought on Jerry Kill to be a consultant, and I believe he's going to be kind of a special assistant to the head coach in some way. And they have a new offensive coordinator. His name is Tim Beck. It is not the Tim Beck the Longhorn fans know, but it is a new offensive coordinator for them as well. So they're making some changes, trying to get this ship steered in a winning direction. And I think they really like, and I do too, I'm not gonna lie, I think they like what they have at quarterback. They brought in 2 potential transfer quarterbacks, but I believe one of these guys has the upper hand.
Yes, definitely. I think that they brought in 2 really talented pieces at the quarterback position, one of which I believe is an absolute game changer. That's Diego Pavia. We'll talk about him here in a second. But looking back at their roster in 2023, Rod, they started out 2-0. And I think everybody, maybe that was holding the over 2.5 team total ticket was sitting there pretty happy, right? Oh, yeah, we're 1 game away. We got 10 more to go. Well, they lost those final 10 games and ended up 10-2. To your point, they were not competitive in SEC play, right? They lost 62-0 to Georgia. They were not close with Tennessee later in the year, 48-24. But you do see that at some point, those 60-0 losses are turning into competitive losses. And again, they lost every game by double digits, but similarly to how we're seeing, or how Texas fans saw Kansas kind of turn things around in the Big 12, Vanderbilt's doing it in their own way, right? They're recruiting a little bit better. You talked about guys out of the state of Texas. Cedric Alexander, a running back from Austin LBJ, really talented 2-way kind of scat back, was one of the state's all-time leading rushers by the time he departed. Dante Carter turned down a number of really talented SEC and Big Ten programs to end up at Vanderbilt at a Cibolo Steel. So they're recruiting better, and I think they're doing solid work out of the portal. Now we'll go to the quarterback position, because Diego Pavia is the guy that I'm looking at right now to win that quarterback job. He was at New Mexico State a year ago, helped the Aggies upset Auburn on the road. How often do you hear about New Mexico State going to Jordan-Hare Stadium and defeating the Auburn Tigers? I would say not too often, but Diego Pavia is a legit gamer. I think that's the best way you can describe him. 3,000 yards through the air, almost 1,000 via his legs, a true dual threat weapon at the quarterback position, 60% completion percentage, 26 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So he can turn the ball over at times. But Rod, let me tell you, Clark Lee loves him. And when we were at SEC Media Days, that was one of the big takeaways that I had from listening to him, because, well, let's be frank, there wasn't a whole lot to listen to him whenever he was up there speaking. He wasn't a guy that commanded the stage and the podium up there, but he did say he watched that Auburn-New Mexico State game 9 to 10 times to get an idea of the quarterback that he was bringing in with Diego Pavia. I'm a big fan of his. I was able to watch a few New Mexico State games last year. Don't ask me why I was watching those games, but listen, he can play.
Were you betting on those games, CJ? Were you wagering on those games? Maybe
we might have had some extra incentives on those games.
Okay, there you go. No doubt. No, I got a chance to. I went and watched a little bit too when I actually did some research for this preview. And I'm with you, man. I think he improved a lot from his first year to his second year. And I think it's going to help because Tim Beck actually, and I probably buried the lead there, the new offensive coordinator was also his offensive coordinator at New Mexico State. So they're bringing the offense with him. He's coming in. That's why he definitely is the front runner, I think, to win the job over the Utah transfer, Nate Johnson, I believe is his name. And he's a really good athlete too. But I do think there is a kind of inherent advantage to obviously Diego Pavia having the system coming in place, having the same offensive coordinator and play caller there as well, and Jerry Kill, who's going to be on the staff. We don't know exactly in what role. He's a consultant, but he's on the staff too, and he was the head coach there at New Mexico State. So it does seem like they're bringing in a lot of the pieces with Diego Pavia, and I like the way that he improved. So I'm with you. I think he could be especially with the offensive line. I mean, they we'll get into that in a second. But if you have an offensive line that can't pass protect, they can't give the quarterback time, or the pocket's constantly collapsing, and you need an agent of chaos. This young man can be it. He can make something out of nothing, create on the fly, improvise, and I think Vanderbilt may need that, and that can be a headache for an opposing defensive coordinator. Problem is, he lost a lot of his weapons. They lost a lot. They lost most of their receiving core. That's the problem with teams like Vanderbilt, right? You do have some good weapons. You're probably going to lose them via the transfer portal. They lost Shepard, I believe, and Humphreys, two really good players, basically two of their leading receivers from last season, and they got to replace those guys. And they brought in some transfer portal candidates who could potentially step up for them. They have Darian Wiley, I believe is his name. They have Quincy Skinner. He's there from last season. Junior Sherrill is a young man that they really like that could potentially step up for them, place a slot. They had a Notre Dame, I believe, transfer they brought in, Micah Bell. They got some guys. Loic, you might know him. Loic Funju, Foinji. I might have gotten his name wrong. I apologize. From Texas Tech. He has a transfer from Tech as well. So they got some guys they brought in. They brought in a lot of possible candidates, but they don't really have a proven commodity really at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, right? You look at Will Shepard and you look at London Humphreys. London Humphreys, I think, who ended up at Georgia, is going to be a very talented piece for the Georgia Bulldogs this year. He had 440 yards receiving a year ago, 20 yards per catch, Rod. I think that's a remarkable average at a school like Vanderbilt, where there's only one, maybe two pieces that can pose as a threat to you defensively. Will Shepard, obviously, the other one, 8 touchdowns. So those two guys were really the two pieces that Vanderbilt had to work with in 2023. And we saw one, they couldn't score all that often. And when they were, it was more times than not going to Will Shepard or London Humphreys. I talked about Cedric Alexander. He was the leading rusher a year ago with only 370 rushing yards. So they weren't averaging too much success really through the ground, right? Only about 4 yards per carry for the two leading rushers a year ago. So things have to get better there. I know you're about to talk about the offensive line, but I do want to mention Micah Bell, talented prospect, right? Ended up at Notre Dame, 4-star guy. Loic Fungi ended up at Texas Tech, 4-star guy. Texas actually teetered around and offered him at some point with him earlier during his recruitment. I don't think they ever got too into the weeds with him, but he's a big body threat that can get vertical there for the Commodores. So I do think, going back to Diego Pavia, who, again, I expect him to be the starting quarterback for Vanderbilt this year, they have some pieces, right? There's no connection yet. There's no real rapport with the wide receivers just yet. However, when you are a school like Vanderbilt, you do need talent. And right now, I think that they did a good job of accumulating talent out of the portal and seeing where that can get them in 2024. I don't think it'll be too far just yet, but they are headed in the right direction, right? They can't go any lower. So I will add that. But Diego Pavia, to me, is still going to be that starting quarterback over Nate Johnson. I do think as long as that offensive line can give him some time, they'll score more points this year than what we saw last year, which was only about 20.5 points per game, which ranked really, really low outside the top 100.
Yeah, no doubt. In the rushing, you think was a real problem. They average like 3.3 yards per rush as a team, and they'll be trying to improve that. And Pavia will just his presence alone will improve the running game. But what they lack kind of in the connection with wide receivers, we talked about how they brought in a lot of the pieces from New Mexico State. That's why Pavia's got the inside track on winning the job. They also brought his tight end with him.
Yeah.
And I like Eli Stowers, I believe is his name, right? Eli Stowers or Stowers. But he was with him at New Mexico State. Actually, a really good player for them. 30 at tight end, 35 receptions, 366 yards, had 2 touchdowns. What I like is the versatility. Also had 28 rushes for him. So they found some way to get him the football as a runner too. So I don't know if they were using that wildcat. I didn't watch enough film see if they were using some tight end and around some handoffs. They put him in the backfield at times, but I thought that was interesting. And this is a guy that was an athlete coming out, right? You probably remember his name.
Yeah, Rod. Texas fans are going to know that name. You know why? Because he ended up at Texas A&M as a quarterback prospect.
Okay,
and then obviously you see the memes, the jokes about Jimbo's high school recruiting at the quarterback position. And you see why that's the case, because Stowers, obviously transferred to New Mexico State and instantly moved to tight end, where actually pretty good prospect.
Yeah, no, actually, yeah. And I think he may end up, they have some talent there actually at tight end between Stowers, and they also have I think his name is Cole Spitz, I believe, is the young man's name. He's 6'7". Hadn't really done anything on the field yet, but just got, the size that you would covet at tight end. So tight end may be a position where they have some depth there and some familiarity if, I think when Pavia ends up winning that starting job. Let's talk about the offensive line a little bit. They had some losses on the offensive line, but also they believe they're going to have a lot of demotions on the O-line because they're bringing in some veterans via the transfer portal. One of the guys is Steven Lasoya. He's from Mississippi State, was a center there at Mississippi State. They believe he's going to end up being a starter for them. Stephen Hubbard is a UTEP guard that's they got via the transfer portal. So they're bringing him in. Also, they added Chase Mitchell from Liberty, 6'4", 330. He's going to come in, believe that he's going to be a potential starter. They have a young man, Gunnar Henson, on the roster now. The talk that I was able to research, there was talk of moving him from tackle to guard and then having someone else step up to be the right tackle. So they're bringing in veterans on the O-line, guys who have played football, not for them. So the continuity and chemistry may be a problem. They're bringing in guys who have played some football, a lot of football at other places. And I think maybe that's the route they want to go. We need some guys who have actually played football at a high level, who have proven themselves pretty much, rather than trying to develop our own line. The guys that because the guys that they're recruiting, and they're doing a better job, I don't know if those guys would be ready developmentally in the SEC as opposed to some guys you can get via the transfer portal who have done that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? When you look at this roster talent and the way that it's been accumulated over the last year or two, Rod, it's really how many Power 4 guys can we get from other programs who maybe didn't get the opportunity they were looking for or looking to bounce back, right? Or, in Diego Pavia's case, jump up a level, right? I think that's the way Vanderbilt's been approaching it. You look at Notre Dame, Micah Bell. You look at Texas Tech, Loic Fouonji, right? You mentioned the offensive lineman just now. All these guys getting the opportunity to play SEC football. The talent, listen, it's not going to be as bad as you think, I would imagine. What held them back a year ago were injuries on the offensive line and obviously quarterback play, which was not great. This year, you mentioned the offensive line additions. Can they gel quickly? They'll have plenty of opportunity to sit back and get that thing right before they play Texas, right? Ball State actually precedes the Longhorns on the Vanderbilt schedule. So very similar, or I guess the complete opposite of Texas's schedule, where they go Georgia, Oklahoma back-to-back weekends, and then Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt will be walking into their home stadium to play Texas after facing Ball State. A little bit different, I would say, in terms of the week prior and the emotions that go into that game. But at the same time, that talent has been getting better. Still not to the level in which I would expect them to compete or be a 500 teams in the SEC. I do think this year they get a win in the SEC. I will say that. That's a big accomplishment for the Vanderbilt Commodores, however.
Yeah, that'd be big. There is talk too, and like I said, I don't know how much this is substantiated, that Vanderbilt could be rotating its tackles and guards by a strong side and a weak side combination. So they can run behind best duo. Yeah, like really, I think that was something that's more of an antiquated thing from back in the day, back when you had like option football and that kind of stuff. But I don't know if modern offenses do that kind of stuff. So that's interesting. I read that too. Let's jump to the defensive side of the ball for Vanderbilt. And last year they struggled. That's why Clark Lee, the head coach, who's a defensive guy from Notre Dame, his background, well-respected defensive mind, he is going to coordinate and call the plays on defense. Third downs, they were pretty bad last year. Allowed opponents to convert close to 47% of their third downs against Vanderbilt. They were 126th in yards per play allowed. If you go look at explosive run rate allowed, they were 87th. Explosive pass rate allowed, they were 81st. They do have some good players, actually, and they brought in some guys via the transfer portal. We can start in the secondary and work our way up, because I think the secondary and the linebackers actually could end up being the strength of this defense. CJ Taylor is probably my favorite player researching for them. Plays the star position, is a hybrid player, safety linebacker, but is a safety. But the way they move him around, they use him a lot potentially at the linebacker depth and on the defense line. He actually had 10 pressures last year. He has dealt with some injuries in his time, but if you go look at it all around, he's probably their best overall player. About more than 50% of his snaps, he was actually in the box or on the defensive line, but can also play good in the secondary. 61.8 passer rating allowed by him, third ranked in coverage grade for safeties in the SEC. So he's a really, really good player. 2 interceptions last season. It kind of starts, I think, with him, and he's also accompanied by, I think, another decent safety they have there. And they brought in 2 corners via the transfer portal. Mark Davis Jr., who's out of Southern Illinois. Marlon Jones Jr., who is out of Eastern Washington. Are 2 of the other corners they brought in. The other safety is Dericky Wright. So I think, and those other 2 guys are expected to start. They got some other pieces. Kobe Taylor they brought in, and he's a part-time starter there at Wyoming. They brought him in. TCU transfer, kind of another hybrid guy. You might know him, Randon Fontenette. They brought in as another good player. They got Dante Carter. You talked about him. There's some talk that he's going to start as a true freshman, potentially for them.
Yeah, I think he will, right? I mentioned he passed up on, Washington, Texas Tech, some really talented programs to end up in the SEC and at Vanderbilt. Again, they've been recruiting Central Texas in the Austin area very well over the last few years. It's been pretty interesting to watch, because you wouldn't expect Vanderbilt to be a formidable foe around the Austin area, right?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily where you'd think their pipeline would be, but it's growing to the point, their secondary does have talent. And I don't think you saw a whole lot of that in 2023, right? They're 109th in yards per attempt via the air, so there was not much success there. However, you start naming some of those names, right? Marlon Jones Jr., Colby Taylor. You mentioned them right away, Rod. Those are guys that you expect to be, again, big-time contributors for the Vanderbilt defense. Dante Carter, again, a guy that I've been able to see several times now. He worked out with BAM Performance down here in the Austin area. Same guy who trains Andrew Makuba, Michael Taft, Jelani McDonald. Again, it's very important. I think right now you're going to see more athleticism in that Vanderbilt secondary than we've seen in years past.
Agreed.
However, does that matter in the end scheme of things, right? Texas had athleticism a year ago, maybe not to the standard in which you wanted a team like Texas to have in the secondary, and it didn't do a whole lot. You know why? Because, the pass rush. It was non-existent. And I think that's going to be the issue for Vanderbilt once again this season. They will have guys defensively, but it won't be to the level again in which you expect them to compete week in and week out in the SEC. And a lot of that starts with that front 7. I do think that there's still a bit of a ways to go to get that ready to compete in the SEC. But I will say talent is on the rise for Vanderbilt. It's all about piecing everything together and getting those trench guys where they need to go before winning and competing week in and week out in the SEC.
Yeah, no, you're right. I like the linebackers, though, in that front 7. They had Langston Patterson's a really good player for them at 8 tackles for loss. They had another young man, a transfer, came out of Notre Dame, I believe, Prince Colley. and they can use him on the edge. You know, he was actually by On3 a couple of years. They had him ranked as a 5-star at one time. They got some talent at the linebacker position, and like I said, they use CJ Taylor as about a hybrid. They move around there. So I think the back seven could end up being the strength of the defense. I do worry that, I'm with you, whether they can rush the passer and whether that defensive line can really be stout against the run. In the interior, they got Devin Lee, who's a D tackle for him. They brought in, they got Demarion Thomas, Corday Sidner, I believe is his name. There's a transfer from Purdue they brought in. Zaylen Wood, Middle Tennessee State transfer they brought in on the defensive line as well. So that may end up being really the determining factor in whether this defense can really truly take a leap, is whether the defensive line can hold up in a line of scrimmage league like the SEC. A couple of nuggets here about special teams for Vanderbilt. They have a kicker that has never, his name is Brock Taylor, never kicked a field goal, an extra point at the college level. So that may not be good because they're going to need a really good kicker. And they did get a punter transfer from Ohio State. I think his name is Jesse Mirko.
Look at that, Rod. I mean, they're getting talent from everywhere.
Yes, you got to celebrate that. If you're, I don't care if it's a punter or not, long snapper. If you're Vanderbilt and you get a transfer from Ohio State, that's pretty damn good. So I'm with you. There's definitely, I think there's definitely progress happening at Vanderbilt. We'll see how much of that next season. All right, good stuff there, CJ. Next time we're breaking down, I believe, they have a bye week. Then we'll break down the Florida Gators.
No bye week for us.
No bye week for us. Just on the schedule, there's a bye week after that. So essentially, Longhorns, after that really tough stretch where you start SEC play and you get Oklahoma and Georgia back to back, at least you'll get a warm down in Vanderbilt, and then you'll just get a straight up week off with the bye week. Yeah, to kind of reset things. All right. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate all the time. We appreciate CJ and all of his nuggets of wisdom for the On Texas football family and for CJ Vogel and for myself, Rod Babers. Until next time, hook 'em horns.